Yo, okay, so we're gonna be doing something a little bit different on Niche Fighter Monday today. It's been a while since I've done any of my, like, fighting game FGC talk stuff, any of my 101s. But yeah, yo, it's been a while, like I said, since I've done any of these, like, talk segments. And just last week, I put up a poll on Twitter, and I have questions. I want to know what the fighting game scene thinks about certain things. I think about these things all the time, so I put it out there into the universe. I was like, what are your indie fighting game deal breakers? What are the things that when you see an indie fighting game make you say, nah, I can't do it, right? We're gonna be putting on our marketing and sales caps today a bit. I'm a hobbyist. I'm a fan of fighting games, but also some of my work involves fighting games and indie gaming, right? I think about these things from a business perspective as well as just a community building perspective. First and foremost, my concern is building a great community. I think we're doing an okay job at that. But the other part of my life is I'm an editor and videographer. I want to do more social media stuff for devs, demoing at events, right? Like this kind of stuff means I got to think about the business side of things, the market of gaming, fighting games, indie games, the cross-section thereof. We're going to be doing a little bit of that, and that's partly what inspired my poll recently. So what I want to do is I want to sit down and take a look at some of the answers from the polls, not only the results, but some of the comments that happened, and then go into some of the things I've been looking at recently. I've put together a list of indie fighting game sales estimates, big estimates, but I think it gives us a sense of how well some of our indie games have sold. And I think maybe looking at those numbers and looking at the response from the poll, maybe we can make some connections, right? Maybe we can glean some insights from this information and find out what is it that can help things pop, right? And I want to look at, so what kind of insights can we divine? And what is the size of the market? What is the potential? If you can only sell an indie fighting game to 10,000 people, can you make that viable selling it at $5? What are some other ways you could do it? How do we support our development? How do players react to the ways in which we monetize our games, right? And all those things are important questions. And I think hopefully looking at some of the player responses can inform some ideas going forward, right? Yeah, the subject is really important to you, right, Niwi? Yeah, if you want to grow out of the hyper niche thing, right? And that's it. And I've said this before, where this is Niche Fighter Monday. How many people can I really expect to come tune in for Niche Fighter Monday? I think realistically, more than we actually think, and I think it's possible with even a small community to create something sustainable. It's about how do we create something sustainable for the players, for the community, for the developers, and yeah, to make sure we get more of this going forward, right? And hopefully grow out of the hyper niche. If we can figure out why the fighting game players might not be super into it, or what more people outside of the fighting game community find interesting about fighting games, perhaps that can inform some decisions about what kind of games we should be making, right? And supporting. But yeah, like I said, we're going to put on our marketing and sales caps. We're going to take a look at some numbers and some responses from this poll, and try to tease some stuff out. Andrew saying, you think some of the devs are a bit too concerned about the price, but for real, players don't care nearly as much as devs think, as long as it's not $60 and as long as it's on Steam. You know what? That's actually a really great place to start, because I think you're absolutely correct. Let's take a look. I have here the results. The results are of our lovely little poll, right? And so, like I said, inquiring minds need to know, right? What prevents you from buying an indie fighting game? What is your deal breaker? So give me some details. And look, all told, 1,271 votes. Combined with, I went and I did some talking to people in other Discords, and I went through the comment section. Some people were like, I didn't vote, but here's why. So there's some other sections that we're going to go over. And so I think this, it struck a bit of a, if not nerve, a bit of a chord with people. Yeah, let's see. You once saw that there was a thread about pricing games, that price sends the signal to players about quality of the game. Customers are supposedly more likely to pay for a $10 game than a $5 game. Not sure how true this is, but that is one of the, and yeah, absolutely. That's one of the pricing and price sensitivity is a really weird and difficult thing to kind of grasp and to handle well. And I think there is a bit of that. Price does signal quality in a certain way. There's also a sacrifice that you're making about you're not guaranteed to get more sales at a lower price. So how much are you sacrificing in the long run, right? It's a big thing. And if we look here, look, so I'm calling it 1,300 between the responses that I got and the conversations that I had in Discords and in the comment section here. Too expensive at the bottom. Now, I mean, in fairness, it's still about if we look at it here, right, too expensive, still about 166 votes, right? So, like, almost 200 people thinking that our games are too expensive. But this lacks some essential context, right? Like, what is too expensive? As someone said just earlier on, I think the idea that so long as your game isn't $60, expense is probably not the biggest factor in what is keeping people away from picking up an indie fighting game. There are definitely some loud voices and some folks who like and there's, yeah, like $20 too much, $40 too much. So finding that sweet spot for the pricing for your indie fighter is definitely going to be a difficult thing. But like, I think all told, it's one of the lesser concerns, right? $5 games. I am the kind of person who wants to try as many things as possible, so I will see a $5 game and say, yoink. A lot of people are going to say, seriously, $5? Why is it only $5? But right at the top, and I think these two are intertwined answers of you should be more concerned about your player base and the connectivity, lack of online and rollback. There was a lot of responses were just hard no. If you don't have at least netcode and ideally rollback, there's no way that I'm going to be able to play. And tied into that is the small player base. If a lot of these games have small player bases in general, having people jump through the hoops of having to go through Parsec is a big hurdle. Having them have to do delay-based netcode, which is subpar, is not a great experience, and they're going to shy away from it. But the idea of, like I've talked about how, like, globally connected some of our indie and niche fighting game scenes are, making sure that those small communities can actually connect is going to be one of the biggest factors. Thankfully, this is, like, becoming a largely solved problem, where I don't think many fighting games are going into production at this point saying, I'm going to have no netcode, or forget it, I'm just doing delay-based, right? Oh, interesting. Related to pricing, for Burp, the biggest factor is no discounts, DNF duel. True. That's part of a concern. And I mean, that's probably the better way, right? I would say having a product valued at something closer to what it's actually valued at, as opposed to at a price that's going to attract more people, means that, hey, yeah, charge $25 for your game and then discount it. Make sure to run sales, make sure to run events. There are things we can do as a community, like the Indie Fighting Game Fest that was run on Steam recently. Developers deciding to offer things like free-to-play weekends, right? And set up a free-to-play weekend and run a tournament so that everyone can play. They spend a day or two getting practice, and on a Sunday you run an event, and then and I understand that this is something that, like, takes a lot of work on the part of the developer and has to understand how the systems and the free-to-play offerings and the demo offerings on services like Steam work. But look, this is something that if your game is too expensive, and there's something connected to too expensive down in the comments that we're going to talk about, and you have a small player base, events that open up your player base to people who are playing free-to-play games or who will jump on a demo or a free demo mean that you can start increasing that. And if you can build up this smaller player base and chip away at the resistance that people have to hopping on some of these indie games. Yeah, the no small player base thing makes you think, says Rash, that those players don't really give a damn about the game or the developer itself. They just look at player numbers. There's certainly a bit of that. I mean, but this is like, I mean, as a player, right, that's a valid concern. If my primary enjoyment out of a fighting game is playing against other people, and I can't do that easily, then I'm going to want to spend my time elsewhere. And so when you consider that people have a finite amount of time, that's not ideal. But I can't fault players for saying why. Okay, and this is another thing that has come up. The why me proposition. We have games still too expensive, still in early access. And then lack of net play rollback and small player base. Now, the lack of net play and rollback, that's going to be, like I said, I believe that is becoming more of a solved problem. So if it now comes down to the small player base, the rollback should help solve some of the small player base problem. And then there are things you can do to reduce this. I mean, the moving from, like, the small player base strikes me as, that is more indicative of the state of affairs, not the reason for the state of affairs, right? Like, the fact is that these games are niche, so we have small player bases, so it's hard to invest. Doing things like having better net play, having better connectivity, being able to build better communities and larger communities over wider spaces, those things are going to chip away at that and help push us out of that area. But How the hell do you do that, right? You got to be able to, like, pay to be able to do that. You have to be able to afford to make your games. As much as it sucks that, yeah, small player base can be used as an excuse to not even look at a game, where players just look at player count and say, not above a certain number, I'm out. But there's, like, a very good reason for that, where, like, players have finite amount of time, and it's hard to invest the time to learn a game and to be good at a game and then enjoy a game, only to realize that you can't connect with anyone to play against them. So why bother? I'm going to go invest in a game like Street Fighter, where if they enjoy Street Fighter as well, they can spend the time there, and they know that they're going to get matches. And this is like a perennial problem. It's one that Matt DeLucas, the Matrified, the developer of Murfight, has discussed. And it's the why me proposition, right? And so I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to, like, when we went down to the comment section of this, right, we got like 470 net play rollback, 470 small player base, early access being an issue. Paywalled demos is a big issue, as well as the why me proposition, right? So related to pricing and early access is the idea of a paywall demo. This came up a lot. Like, people mentioning Patreon demos completely unprompted really surprised me, and it's something that keeps people away from even trying the game. But Rash, and related to your point, the why me proposition. Why is somebody gonna go and play a Murfight or a Mega Knockdown or a Robo O when they can play a Street Fighter or Tekken or, you know, whatever your favorite mainstream game is, right? And not only are you competing with the giants in the industry, but you're competing with players' time and attention between retro games. Why am I going to spend 15 bucks on an indie fighter when I can hop on Fightcade and play any of the dozens and dozens of games that are there and readily available for me to play for free? This whole, like, calculus of fighting games take a lot of time to learn, and being able to invest the time in a community that you know is there, and a community that is readily accessible for consistent matches. Now, you don't need a player base that is huge in order to do that, and I think that's where the failing on the players' part comes in. Players are easy to dismiss it because they see, oh, only, whatever, 50 concurrent players. But if you have 50 concurrent players consistently, and people can get matches, good matches, quality matches, whether that be connection, whether that mean a variety of skill levels. Once again, Murfight, I'll bring it up because it is not the biggest community in the indie fighting game scene, but it has a very dedicated community, and it is large enough and varied enough that is able to sustain like monthly tournaments and community net play sessions. Now, it's not quite there in terms of being able to support an online matchmaking queue, but you have this core base where, look, it's not hitting 1,000 concurrent players, but it doesn't have to for you to be able to get matches, right? And players need to reckon with that and say, okay, I can hop in. That's not something that's preventing me from playing, so I'm going to hop in. And that helps these games reach a critical mass where matchmaking queues can happen, where it's more than just developer-run tournaments that are happening. It's community events. More people do the community events and run lobbies. In fairness to the players, I understand why they're reluctant to invest the time, but also players need to broaden their horizons and say, it's not sheer numbers that is preventing me from being able to enjoy this game. Okay, and then another thing, in terms of player expectations, right? It's totally fair. People are saying, I haven't tried Frostfire or ESLAF because it's a paywall demo. I totally get that. It's hard. The idea of monthly subscriptions actually was something that came up. Subscription model for me, already pay too many bills and I'm not paying a bill for a fighting game? Totally fair, right? Lack of accessibility, ESLAF Frostfire look great, but you need to wait for the release because I can't do the Patreon subscription option, locked behind it. This is a common thing. Ongoing cost might be a concern that deters people, but I like the way it was posted on your stream on Monday. So you can hop in for a little bit, hop back out, hop back in. It doesn't need to be all or nothing. The recurring cost of a Patreon frames it in the light that you need to have a monthly subscription and stay on forever. It's fair, right? Like that is the assumption, is that, hey man, it's a monthly subscription. I gotta be in there for X amount of time. You don't. Like, you can hop in. The way Frostfire works is they're doing monthly Patreon demo builds. So this month they released their online rollback demo, so you can finally play online with people. So you can spend $7.50 or $10 or whatever it is for 1 month of access. It's a $10 demo. It's a try, but it's not about, like, you do that and then you back out, right? And you don't get an update to the next month's the demo, but it gives you that month. and then you don't have to hop back in. And then you know what? You come back in later on. You see another demo where a new character drops and you want to try that character. $10 to play the character. You get to play online. It's not required to be this ongoing cost and experience. I think is once again a thing that we as players need to be able to adjust to. We need to be able to tweak our perceptions. It's not that I am tied into paying this in perpetuity like I am with Netflix, right? And we've seen a change with subscription models where people are tired of them, so they do that. They'll do 3 months of Netflix whenever their favorite show is out, and then they'll hop to something else. That's okay. That's okay. For me, as a creator who has, you know, subs on Patreon and here on Twitch that come in and out, and that's amazing. I get it. The finances don't always work for you. You can't always justify, right, the expense. Maybe this is not something that you can do for a month on end. But you know what? You coming in with a few bucks for a couple months makes me know as a creator that people care and that people are interested in this, and it gives me the drive to continue and the actual cash to help make it sustainable. And then you get something for a little bit, for a month. You get a little bonus, and you get to play this game, right? And it's not you're not tied into it. The guilt shouldn't be there. That's not what it's about. Right, yeah, Burp saying, you want to do that, but I'm a little worried the devs would be, you paid once, fuck you. I mean, I obviously can't speak for everyone, but, like, even if it's temporary support, even, like, I mean, like, I don't get mad when someone drops bits instead of subbing, right? Like, that's amazing. It's a show of support, and it actually, I think it's important, because if a bunch of people hop on when the rollback demo drops, then that indicates that there's interest for people to be able to play. Right? It indicates that people have been craving rollback and netcode connectivity to be able to get into this game. If you see a character drop and then you don't get any bumps, and then the next month you release another character that's a grappler and you get a huge bump, well, oh, lo and behold, you have an audience that is interested in grapplers. Maybe that's something that you need to consider, right? Like, whether it be for your marketing plans, your development plans, whatever. But it's good information. There's a twofold problem of what are developers presenting and how do players receive it. Just last week on stream, I said that I was actually impressed with the Frostfire Patreon and seeing how successful it was. I actually made the connection that perhaps it is the paid demo that is actually something of value. And I've seen several of these Patreons with paid demos that are quite successful. And then I see the responses, and it's like, no, paywall demos, that's keeping me back. So what does that mean? I mean, for me, I think first and foremost, it means that there's very clearly a demand for people to play these games. You have a core group of people in your marketing funnel who are like dedicated fans and loyalists. And then you have folks who are missing out on something. So I don't know. It's interesting. For the developers in the chat, what are your thoughts on providing something that is a tiered demo? Do you do an offline-only demo with maybe only training mode and 2 characters? But then, like Frostfire, you have a 4-character online-enabled Patreon demo? And that way people can try the game. Because if we look at the other responses that we got in this poll, right at the top, under the 4 like options actually available in the poll, in the comments section when I went through, visual character style and appeal, and gameplay style / originality. These were the 2 core things, right? And connected to being in early access, being paywalled, or being too expensive. How are you to know that you like a game unless you can try it? Problem being here that, from a Patreon perspective, one of the core levers that a developer has to pull is access to their demo. If you pull that lever as a developer and say you're cut off, is that going to hurt you more? Maybe you can create a system where there's like a tiered demo. It might awaken some FOMO. You're absolutely right. It might awaken some FOMO, where you get on there and you start doing cool shit in training mode and you're like, oh damn, I want to pull this off on someone. And you know that there are people over there playing with rollback netcode sitting in a lobby. You could get in on that, right? Perhaps that is a way. And it alleviates some of the like concerns and some of the issues that players have with accessibility and pricing, where if it's just a matter of trying the game and seeing if you like it, you don't have to actually pay for that. But if you want to play the game and experience it like at its true potential with other players, then there's a cost of entry. But that is what supports the development and the completion of the game. Yeah, Bertman, here in your country, you play a lot of indie stuff because we are the legit, true, no ironic poverty gaming scene. And for sure, that is totally a valid concern that like a lot of us don't like thinking of. There are some like just class and cost concerns that some people are not in the socioeconomic bracket to be able to actually afford these things. And if they get cut off, it's a harsh reality. You need to remember when you're creating something that ultimately you will never be able to actually hit everybody. But it's about doing our best and making sure we have those considerations in mind, which is why I think free-to-play games are important, which is why I think free demos are important. So I think it's interesting, like maybe we can work something out, right? Mohost, I'd encourage folks who can't afford a game to pirate it, honestly. There's a print-and-play mode for Versus Tag Shuffle right now for anyone who wants to make the game themselves, in a sense. And yeah, for those situations where it's just that's the harsh reality, sure. It's just hopefully folks who have it within their means don't use it as an excuse. But ultimately, it's something like pirates are not your customers, so why are you catering to them? Pirates can still be your community members. Let that be said. But they're not your customers. Rash saying, honestly, you'd like to have working lobbies for a fighter with a training/arcade mode with at least 2 characters for a demo, but that might be asking for a bit much. It's so hard to say. Like, what is the thing you need? I know that, like, for me as a player, if it was online only and I had no, like, sandbox or training mode to try stuff out in, I get very frustrated. The DNF Duel beta was super frustrating for me because I do not learn well in that kind of atmosphere. But others really do, and they don't give a shit about training mode, and they really want to just hop online and throw hands with someone. It's hard to tell which is going to be the ideal. We're putting on our marketing and sales cap, right? So if I'm looking at this from a perspective as a developer, as a creator, what can I offer you for free that is enticing, that provides value, that might help lead you down the funnel into being a paying customer and a loyalist, which can help me complete a final game or product that I can sell to a wider audience. If I'm looking to do that, like I said, one of the few levers you have as a developer, at least the strongest lever, is going to be access to your demo. Like we said, maybe creating the sense of FOMO, right? Which it sounds so manipulative, but this is the reality of how do you create sustainability, right? And it's like providing something of value for free to people so they understand what you're about and supporting them. That's important. And then working it into paid models, which actually help you complete development. I think online, especially if it's something that has an ongoing cost, right? Like you think about services that require matchmaking servers, some of those things cost money. So if you're running, I believe Quantum is a popular one, and if you're running that for your game, then you already have an ongoing cost of like maintaining a live game, even if it's a demo, even if it's an early access. So having that be paywalled to some degree makes a level of sense. Yeah, MeWe. So I think something like that, like an offline demo with training mode, is the appetizer. Yeah, calling it FOMO might put it in a bad light, right? But well, I mean, and I think, okay, if we wanted to put that in a little bit of a better light, right? It's not fear of missing out, but it is, I don't know, like the culmination of what you're expecting, right? So like, it's not fear of missing out, it's caution of lost opportunity. I like that. I think, okay, let's look at some of these comments. What are people expecting when they look at I want access to the game, it being paywalled is a problem? What are they looking to get? Tough to make a decision. We're not sure, and that I won't like how the game feels where I've already got my familiarity elsewhere. I like to give a lot of fighting games a try, or at least to pick up a copy to support the devs. Never play a lot of them for a very long time. People need to know, is the movement fun? Do they feel satisfying to land? What is the level of polish? If you have heard of it, then it's either because it doesn't appeal to you that you don't pick it up, or it isn't fun/easy to use because you can't try it before I buy. I think the try before you buy, you don't need the online. Perhaps that is something that, yeah, that having a tier demo. Now, once again, this is another layer of responsibility. You have to maintain a free public demo as well as a live early access paid wall demo. The free version, the offline version, could be out of step with the updated one, right? So like the periodical updates to a free demo combined with the ongoing monthly updates like Frostfire does for their paywall demo. If we take our players at face value and say games are too expensive and I really need to be able to try them, then yeah, it's fine. You don't have to buy and worry about a small player base because you can at least try the game for free and then try to get exposed to the community. Oh, interesting. Andrew saying that you think that don't think that many people actually want to try before they buy. As long as there's enough coverage of the gameplay, you can do without it. But if you do a demo, it should absolutely not be very generous. Because that's the biggest risk with demos, right? I mean, if you provide too much, and I mean, if you look at some of the comments here, I'll play indie games for a bit, so I can't afford to spend 20 bucks on them. I don't play them for that long. I hop in and out. If you have a player base that are tourists, essentially, right? And I don't mean that in a negative light. I just mean that as a dip in and out. One of the more casual player base that is not going to be long-term players. You might lose them entirely if you just provide a demo that provides too much. Right, I have personally experienced with this, especially back in the days of the Xbox 360 and PS3. The culture of demos for games really developed there because it was so easy to distribute them to large amounts of people on their consoles. And you started seeing a bunch of games that would release demos, and I would be able to play them online as well as some limited offline modes. And I would play them for 3 weeks, a month. Then I was like, I kind of got my fill, right? Like, I enjoy the gameplay loop, and I've done it to death over the course of a month, and I'm kind of out. So yeah, it's a real big risk. It's like giving someone a meal as a free sample, where you're like, they're not going to come into your restaurant, they just had a meal. And I think going off what Bertman said here, we have visual style and gameplay style and originality, which in the comment section was definitely the top concern, where people are just like, look, if it's not polished, polish was another one. Lack of polish, lack of game modes and features. You see players who are primarily online players who say there's not enough, like the player base isn't big enough and the connectivity isn't good enough. And then you have the players who don't so much care about that, who are like, where is my boss rush mode? Where's my arcade mode? Where are my ghost battles? All that kind of stuff. Training modes and trials and tutorials, right? They're lacking those. And then the other people who just like, they turn on the game and they're like, damn, there are no characters for me. This is not the style I want, right? And so many of those things are so subjective, right? Like, I think polish, there's an amount of polish, there's an amount of game feel that is going to... There's some level of objectivity there of good game feel and bad game feel, but what people want out of it is going to be different, so it's not one-to-one, right? Like, if someone doesn't like the style of your game, people were talking about being turned off by not only that they can't find a style that appeals to them, but they have certain styles that explicitly turn them off. Where if games are, you know, a little too horny or a little too lewd or a little too one note, right? Like there was a comment that was basically like, I'm tired of games that we're all X, we're all anthropomorphized animals. We're all like magical girls. We're all, you know, all that stuff. One-note character designs, uninteresting visuals, but so much of that is so subjective. And like, there's so little that you can do. Yeah, merfolk. But there's so little you can do ultimately, because there are some of these style decisions that people are going to latch onto and be the reason they're in there for it. Where you have other decisions like Mrs. MKL, she doesn't like the anime style, so she's like, I see those giant bugging eyes, and she's out. But people love anime style, and one of the biggest comments I had seen in my Discord conversations was the fact that there aren't enough anime style indie fighting games. There aren't enough 3D indie fighting games. You could choose a certain type of aesthetic and alienate and attract the same number of people, and there's no guarantee about it. So how much you're going to do that, I think that's so much more important, is have a consistent, have a very pointed style. I think games like Resistance 2040X, this is a game that has an extremely distinct style, a very pointed style, a style that is consistent, right? This has a great aesthetic hook. Like I said, the more important thing than saying I need a style that appeals to the most amount of people is that I need a style that will resonate with the right group of people. And if you make choices like this, I mean, like I have long complimented Resistance 2040X for its consistency and style. It's very sharp. It's very clear what kind of thing they're after. And you look at these UI elements, the giant color-coded state changes like guard break, the very clear health bar indicators and the chip pips within them. All the UI elements are just intertwined in a way that is just excellent. And like, nailing something like that is way more important. Robo-O is a game that does it extremely well, where it is like, dude, we are the Famicom giant robot fighting game. You're like, yes, giant robots, yes, pixel art, yes, Famicom limitations. If you don't like those things, that's fine, because the people who do will find a home there. And I think, so that's like, when it comes to the presentation stuff, it seems fruitless to go through the, I need to appeal to every demographic. And doing it right within the demographic that you have, I think that's where you need to be. Yeah, Resistance 2040X has so much potential, right? And it's like, I didn't even get into the, yes, it's going to have rollback netcode. Yes, it's going to have interesting single-player modes and online features. Yes, it has a really interesting gameplay loop that sets itself apart from most fighting games while still appealing to fighting game fans. It's like, it's hitting on all the right fucking notes. Once again, that's the reason I love Merfight too. Merfight has a very, very clear aesthetic, where you're like, it has a clear inspiration, where we're like, merfolk, friends. It's the underwater post-apocalypse, and it is both grimdark and goofy, right? And I'm like, give me that. And then you have wild, expressive gameplay features and styles and mechanics. You have wide character archetypes. You have great online net. It's hitting all those marks, right? I think it's way more important to do that and say, y'all don't like the merfolk? That's cool, man. You don't gotta like merfolk. I hope people try it out anyways. Yeah, having a clear and concise design ethos, I think, is far more important, and is the thing that addresses the concern of the player. There is my real thing. Lack of polished visual mechanical presentation. So, like, visually speaking, this is something that has got to get worked on, right? I mean, the reality is that how can you polish your game in a way that looks like Street Fighter 6 or the new Tekken or the new Mortal Kombat when you don't have multiple millions of dollars and, you know, several thousand people on your team? It becomes about prioritizing. And once again, the polish on something like Resistance is excellent. Omen of Sorrow tried. They tried so hard. It made me so sad that it didn't work. Oh man. Right, Omen of Sorrow. That is a game. They built an amazing vertical slice. It was extremely polished. It was online enabled. I don't know. They built an amazing vertical slice. And then, oh wait, no, that's Umbral Core. Oh shoot. Okay, I think I hit on the problem. Is that I was unable to differentiate between Omen of Sorrow and Umbral Core. That is part of the issue, right? When it comes to what is the differentiation in the visual styles between Omen of Sorrow, Umbral Core, and even stuff like Terradrome, right? Where, like, Terradrome's also an interesting game that uses the classic horror characters and tropes and design ideas, as well as modern horror stuff, but kind of fits in the same dark fantasy horror realm as Omen of Sorrow and Umbral Core. When I look at a game like Resistance or Robo-O, they have very distinct things. How many other fighting games are out there looking like Robo-O? Honestly, not that many. Whereas there's obviously like 3 big enough names in the indie horror fighting game scene for me to say I cannot fucking differentiate between them at first glance. And no, that's not true. If I saw visuals of them, I would totally. But, like, yeah, right, the name recognition doesn't pop in with that distinct driven visual style and aesthetic style. I'm not confusing Resistance with it. I'm not confusing Merfight with anything else. I think this is this is an interesting cross section of the sets of concerns that players have. If we're looking here at the top of the comments, visual style and character appeal, gameplay style and originality, I think there's this inverse expectation for indie devs that they have to be more creative than the mainstream devs. When Capcom reinvents the wheel with fighting games, people get upset and don't like the new iterations. Whereas I think indie devs are meant, or people desire indie devs to break that mold. I'm gonna bring up a little bit of something else here. Yeah, indies are allowed and expected to be creative in a way that they aren't. So if you're gonna be looking at how do I get through people's deal breakers, you're gonna have to hit on some kind of visual style that appeals, that is extremely well polished, that offers some kind of gameplay original fighting system as well. Right? And then that's true. That's the other one. The people want it to be identical. I mean, some people do just want to play the game. But I don't know. I think if you look at the games like Punch Planet, which is very much a we love Street Fighter 4 in the era post Street Fighter 4, how much zeal is there for that? Not that much. Going back to older styles of games might prove more valuable in that way. But okay, so related to all this, right? If you need a game with polish, interesting visual style, interesting mechanical style that is relatively inexpensive to play with rollback netcode, I think you might find yourself playing these games. Now, on top of going through and doing this poll, like I said, I have gone through and scoured the internet for publicly available sales information. So these are sales estimates for Steam for indie fighting games. I've got it related. I've also got information on when the release date was, whether or not it was free to play, and what kind of rollback and netcode it has. Now, these are sales estimates. I'm not entirely sure how accurate they are. Based on some of the information that I've been able to confirm, free-to-play games seem to be undercounted, and for-pay games seem to be overcounted. A little bit. Mostly accurate, a little bit overcounted, but a pretty significant gap in the free-to-play games being undercounted from all of the developers that I've spoken to that have shared information with me. Out of all of the concerns that we kind of brought up with this poll, gameplay originality, aesthetic style, ability to play online with people, large player base. We have games like Skullgirls, which very distinct, driven visual style, also really interesting mechanically, also really hit on the essential game modes and the kind of developer response. That is all, like, they hit it, and they hit it at a time in 2013 where no one else was doing this. So, I mean, that's worth noting, right? Skullgirls has been out for a while. Lethal League was out for a while. I think this is one of the things I wanted to bring people's attention to. If we look at our top 10 games, like the top 10 games in sales, 2013, 2014, 2013, 2015, 2016, right? Like, most of these games are 2017 for Rivals of Aether with their 1 million plus. Some of these games have been out for several years, which gives them a little bit of an advantage, of course. But I think when we're looking at total sales compared to when these games were released, there was a sweet spot in the indie game world where the market was so much less crowded that when people climbed to the top, they climbed much higher. A game like Skullgirls was able to dominate that market. A game like Dive Kick was able to dominate that market because so much less was available. I think the overall appetite for indie games has spread out elsewhere. The fighting game stuff has become more cloistered. So now, when we're looking at our release dates, 221,000 for Dive Kick, 3 million for Skullgirls, 842,000 for the first Lethal League in 2014, and then 135,000 for Lethal League Blaze 4 years later in 2018. Like, I think this gap here is indicative of the shrinking of the indie fighting game and fighting game adjacent market, right? When you had in 2016 137,000 for fucking Brief Karate Foolish of all things. Umineko Golden Fantasia at 14k, 13k for Arcana Heart. Those are pretty good. But as we move down into 2019, our high end here is 30k for Hyper Fight, which was free to play, and Fight of Gods, which was a meme like explosion. Right, our 2019s, Fantasy Strike, 35k. That's half for pay, half free to play. Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, 48k, which is amazing in 2019, but it's tied to a major IP, right? So I think there has definitely been a reduction in the total possibility. 114,000 for Them's Fightin' Hurts, also tied to a major IP, even though it's not technically real. It's so hard to say what is the determining factor here, right? Lethal League Blaze, was it a marketing thing? Was it a branding thing? Was it a size of the market thing? Was it a quality of the game thing? Yeah, absolutely. Skullgirls goes on sale for really cheap. They're able to do that because they're not expecting it to be the main moneymaker anymore. Bundles are a huge deal. That's one of the things I would have loved to be able to do, is to actually find out how many of these games had major bundle sales in order to help account for their numbers. It's hard to tease that out with only publicly available information. So that is definitely going to skew, right? Like, whenever we're looking at these things, we need to keep in mind length of time on the market, pricing, inclusion in bundles, those are all going to help determine what is going on here with these numbers. But once again, I think it is indicative of a general shrinkage of the wider fighting game market. Fewer people are trying unknown fighting games, at least on Steam here. Why is that? With an explosion in attention on niche and indie fighting games, what is the barrier here? So, like, things of note. Idle Showdown is tied to known IPs in the sense of VTubers. Yomi Hustle was an absolute fucking giant on TikTok, which exploded it into popularity. Buck Up and Drive did a really great promotional drive to really get their game out, and it definitely paid off. But also, kind of fighting game adjacent, right? Also, kind of fighting game adjacent. So much of the interest in Idle Showdown is from fighting game adjacent players. And then when we look at our total sales, it's the same story, right? Lethal League, fighting game adjacent. Yomi Hustle, Dive Kick. Not your traditional one. Battlegrounds, fighting game adjacent. Lethal League Blaze, fighting game adjacent. Them's Fightin' Hurts, got a lot of interest from the My Little Pony crowd. Acceleration of Sagiri, fighting game adjacent. Big IP. And then other ones of note in the 30k range, right? Like, we have memes with Fight of Gods. We have memes with Kianta. We have memes with Buck Up and Drive. Also fighting game adjacent. So, what is this determining factor, right? I mean, there's no one thing. It's always a confluence of events. You need to be able to hit something like, this is a truly, Yomi Hustle has a truly unique gameplay hook. Combined with its explosion on TikTok, I think made for 240,000 units, right? Like, that's wild, just on Steam. And the game wasn't even out on Steam for a while, it was only out on itch.io. So this kind of lines up with the poll results, right? It has an interesting visual style, unique visual style. It's not for everyone, but that doesn't matter, it gets people attention. It has a great, unique gameplay mechanic that is a little bit outside of fighting games as a core. And then going down, Buck Up and Drive, great aesthetic, great story, great social media campaign, and has really done something a little bit different in terms of relating it to fighting games. Footsies, another one, very unique visual style, very unique gameplay hook, great social media outreach. Like, these are ones, them's Fightin' Hurts, same thing. This is tied to an IP though, right? So outside of being tied to a known IP like you have for Idle Showdown, at this point like you have for Skullgirls, right? And I think some of the anime games, Arcana Heart, Battle Fantasia, Chaos Code did pretty good. Phantom Breaker Battlegrounds did pretty good. Where I think at this point we're saying that most of these have rollback netcode. Free-to-play is a consideration, but kind of a crapshoot. And then we have this unique visual style, and so it's like, hitting on that combination of unique visual style, great polish, interesting gameplay mechanics, and then hitting it on social media and getting the right awareness and attention, right? I mean, it is the thing that is impossible to replicate. But I think it's also, you can capitalize on these things. You should be focusing on these things. Once you have a solid style, once you have a solid gameplay mechanic, build up your community, provide value in the spaces that you're making with the player base that you have. Turning it to sustainability, if we're not getting the sales, you need to be able to get your, like, champions to help push you forward in terms of what do we have for our resources? How are we going to gain access to more funds to continue development to hire artists? And I genuinely believe that looking at Patreon is going to be a way to do that. I think that's going to be a real key. How do you create a Patreon community or a subscription-based community as an ongoing developer doing early access games that does not alienate your player base with fears of perpetual subscriptions, with fears of paying for an unfinished product, with fears of paying for too much? Maybe there's a way to do that. Is your game going to be $40 and you have a $5 a month Patreon subscription? Maybe after 8 months you gain access to a code for the final release, right? 8 months in a row of Patreon access will grant you that. And so, sure, you might back out after that and say, I don't have this, right? I don't know. creating I think looking into the division of a public free demo and a paywalled online offering wherein you build your core community. You get your influencers, you get your loyalists, you get your mega fans in there, and provide them value, and then provide something of value for the people who are not yet in there, and a reason for them to want to hop on board. I think a lot of indie devs look for, they try to go down the marketing and sales funnel by going awareness, sale, not realizing that there's like awareness, acknowledgement, engagement, consideration, purchase, loyalist, right? Like there's a whole lot of this. Look, this is like a marketing funnel, right? It's like people are aware of your product, they consider your product, you convert them into customers, and they then become loyalists and advocates. When you have developers trying to go from awareness right into loyalty and advocacy and wondering why there's nothing in the middle. Yo, yeah, did arcade goers worry too much about paying too much for the experience? Arcades are, right? But I mean, that's, you're looking 25, 50 cents for an arcade play. You can dole that out. You get to try for a minimal amount. Turning the idea for players from I shouldn't have to pay for access to the game in general to try it, to okay, I got free access. If I want to try all the features, then it's paid access. Trying to like create a parallel to that arcade culture actually is a really good idea. It is an excellent idea, actually, that I think a developer who has a Patreon should consider. Especially when you think about the things I was saying. Like, if you're going to be doing developer-driven events for your Patreon members who are now playing your online-enabled game, that is you, the arcade host, running an event. You come in and you put your quarter down for a match, great, you're in the tournament, right? You come in and you pay your Patreon entry, great, you're in our tournament. It is about creating value every step down your marketing and sales funnel, right? And so for a sales funnel, more explicitly, right, when you're looking to sell a product, you're looking at awareness, discovery, they evaluate the product, they finalize their intent to purchase, and whether or not they bail or purchase is there. And then you have your loyalty, and those are the people who are running your community events. Those are people who are in your brackets on a monthly basis, talking to people about your game, bringing them to weeklies. Those are your loyalists. And those are so important for indie devs. I am a loyalist for many indie devs. I did it for Fantasy Strike for years. I do it for Robo-O and Murphite. Like, these are games that I love and I think are valuable, and I want to help bring them to people. But most people are sitting at the top of this funnel here, right around awareness. And they might know about your game, they might have discovered what it's all about, but they haven't even gotten to the evaluation point, right? And this evaluation point is where the demos come into play. And perhaps the free demo brings them from evaluation into a paid demo, brings them to their intent, and then they can decide, looking at what's available, whether to purchase it. And then you'll see, the loyalists are the ones that'll stay month to month. The ones that aren't loyalists, they might pop in and out for 1 or 2 months a year. But both of those individuals are valuable. And it's about trying to funnel as many people down here into possible. So what can you do along the way to help build awareness, help foster discovery, help encourage evaluation, help tip their intent into a purchase, and make them become loyalists? So I'm going to be putting these numbers out. I will put out the numbers for the poll, as well as the numbers, the public sales numbers that I've come across. And I want to hear from developers. What do you think? What is the most important thing that we can do to bring players into this funnel, from awareness to discovery to evaluation to intent, right? And like, this is all relatively basic marketing and sales stuff, right? Like this marketing funnel stuff. But I'm not sure how much it's being applied, because when you look at how people handle their Patreon accounts, sometimes they put it out there and then they say, why don't I have any subs? And it's like, you don't talk about it. You don't post there. You don't do anything with it. You're not fostering a community and creating incentives. Those are the things that you really need to be doing. And so, yeah, the Patreon's not going to work if you expect it to be, I've made people aware of my Patreon, why don't I have a loyalist? So we need some much more like explicit work along the way to figure out how to move people along. And I think it used to be easier in the days of, 2013, the halcyon days of the early indie game dev world, where people were immediately, they were like, indie games exist, I'm evaluating my intent to purchase. And they started halfway down this funnel. I don't think there's been enough concentration from developers on how to manipulate and how to work within these levels of your funnel. And that's kind of like created this gap where you can't get people into the purchasing, so less people are buying your games, right? Marketing and sales cap, y'all. Yeah, you can always have the latest version reserved for patrons. That's my ultimate thing that I think you should do. I like the Frostfire model of having monthly updates that not only do bug fixes, but have graphical changes, more art coming in, fine-tuning the systems, optimizing the game, offering new features. That's fantastic. Yes, maintain that, because they're already doing that and they're already maintaining that. And realistically, it's like if they were to look at their the demo they have right now for patrons and say, I'm going to offer you training mode with 4 characters, no other options. If you want to try that game, maybe versus AI. If you want to try that game, you can try that game and you can play that game, right? You can't join tournaments. You can't play with your friends online unless you want to parsec and play in training mode, which then who's really going to stop you? But I think that is definitely one of the ways that you can create value and incentive and help move people down that line. But yeah, it's important to remind them that the Patreon exists at all. That is surprisingly, I'm guilty of this. I have it right up here, and most streams I forget to be like, hey y'all, I do stuff on Patreon. I write articles there and have exclusive behind-the-scenes content. Okay, so I've been talking a lot from the dev perspective, but also from just generally a content creator perspective, right? That's something that realistically I intend on doing. A lot of people use ad block on Twitch. I get that. I understand why people don't like ads. If you're one of those people who use ad block, you want ad block absolution, you want forgiveness for using your ad block and want to help support me in some way, I should have a minimal purchase tier, $1.50, $2 on Patreon, which is your absolution. Use ad block all you want on my content, that's cool. This $2 a month actually helps me more than your ad views. And that's something to get. Like, Patreon for me as a creator is my, like, that's my loyalists, man. Like, the people who love me and want to support me and see more of this and are my biggest boosters are going to be in there. I don't expect most people to be in there. But there are ways to, like, help work people into there, where it's like, hey, you see me on stream, you're tired of ad block? Hey, cool, $2 a month, don't worry about ad block. Right? That goat guy, there you go. Drop me the follow, use that ad block, and if you have $2, maybe drop me in on Patreon, right? Like, that's totally doable, and helps work people in and brings them into the community. They see more of my Patreon stuff, which I think is actually kind of cool and valuable, too. Hey! Thanks, Red Skull, for the cheer. Much appreciated. And I think this is an important thing, like I said earlier on, when it comes to Patreon demos or supporting streamers or supporting artists that you love if they have a Ko-Fi. It doesn't have to be in perpetuity. You're not chained to me. Right? It's like, I want people to be like, hey, you know what? I got, like, screaming, like, I got 100 cheer. Great. I'll throw you 100 cheer. You know what? In 2 days, I'm going to be on someone else's stream and I'm going to throw them 100, right? You don't got to give 5 to me. You give 100 to 5 streamers. And honestly, it lifts all boats. It makes everyone slightly more sustainable. Instead of getting stuck in the, I can't do enough, so I won't do anything. Let's do a little bit where I'm able to, and that's going to do way more for helping streamers and developers and artists get out the amazing art that they're working on, right? Which is really what it's all about. Like I said, the ethos here is support your indies, and so how can we do that, right? What are the struggles that we're having as players? What are the things keeping us from supporting them more? Some of them are internal things, some of them are externalities. And we got to work at both ends, from both developers, content creators, and players and consumers. We got to kind of like work at how to make this viable for everyone. All right. I'm gonna take off the marketing cap now. We're gonna hop in and just play some freaking niche fighters. How else do we support the indies?